Hello, everyone. Welcome to the second episode of Be Real Talks. I am your host, Sophia Gibri. For those of you who didn't get to catch the first episode, this is really going to be a space where we have genuine conversations with various people, various guests, and we're going to be talking about some career advice that they have and different experiences that they've had in the workplace and how that's connected to different aspects of their identity. So today with us, I have Sha-Niyah Ortiz. She is a SUNY Oneonta grad. She graduated in 2019 with the degree in sociology. Currently, she is working on her master's in social work at Binghamton University. Sha-Niyah has experience working as a student leader and a peer coach in opportunity programs such as the Educational Opportunity Program and Access to College Excellence. And Sha-Niyah is also experienced in facilitating and leading inclusive dialogues at Oneonta campus, where she has led student discussions around race and how those kinds of things are connected to current social issues. So I'm very excited to have Sha-Niyah with us here today. The theme that we're going to be focusing on is tokenism in the workplace, particularly higher ed. So just to get us started, Sha-Niyah, what has your experience attending a predominantly white institution been like?
So I would say for me, it's been pretty fine, but I would say it's kind of forced me as a woman of color to kind of engage in educational talks kind of spontaneously. So being that it's in upstate, a lot of the students I've come into contact with are also from predominantly white areas, or their high school was predominantly white. So I feel like it's kind of brought up those conversations of, okay, if we're all like in one setting and someone who came from one of those types of areas will say something problematic, it's kind of caused the conflict within myself to kind of be like, okay, should I address this? Should I not address this? Is it my place to address this? Am I kind of looking too deep into it? Like that kind of thing.
Okay, yeah, I think you really showed how it can be that kind of internal struggle for
Mm-hmm.
some students, right? Of, is it my job to educate in this moment,
Yeah.
or can I just be myself and live through this
Yeah.
experience, right?
Yeah.
And kind of building on that, what is tokenism to you, and have you experienced it in the workplace or in higher ed?
Yeah, so I would define tokenism as kind of pinpointing out something that someone else has and using that for your own benefit, whatever that may be. And I feel like personally, for me, I feel like I have experienced kind of tokenism, but at the same time, I wouldn't say overtly kind of tokenism. I would say I feel like the tokenism I've experienced has kind of been masked in a way, but it's still there. So for example, if I got invited to come do something for the school, in terms of like if the school reached out to me to participate in something and I would show up to that project, I'd look around and I'd be like one of the only people of color there. And so I would sit there and I'm like, okay, this is a great opportunity. But in the back of my mind, I'm thinking like, okay, am I here because they actually value me as a student, or am I here because they need another person of color? So, and it's unfortunate because it almost feels like I can't say anything because it's like, oh, then you're being ungrateful. You got invited to this, maybe it's not that, and like maybe you're trying to make it about it. And I think that's kind of something that goes along with attending a PWI, because it almost seems as you can't complain. You know what I'm saying? Like you are being a representation for your people. Like, look at you, you got invited to come do this. But at the same time, it's like, in my mind, I'm like, okay, but do they actually want me here, or am I just a face,
Yeah, I think that really speaks to a lot of those power dynamics, right? Is you're a student, you're happy, and like you said, you're grateful to be invited to those spaces and you're happy to be attending the college. But then it's like you don't feel comfortable enough to ask that question of, was there a reason you hired or you picked me out of all the other students, right? That kind of thing. And then also, I think you highlight well of how it's this constant question, right? Of like, it's almost delegitimizing, right? It's like, why are they asking me to be here? Is it because of the value I'm bringing, or is it just because of my race? So
Yeah. Yeah. And it's unfortunate because like I know my own qualities as like as a student, and at the same time like I'm sitting there thinking like, okay, have they actually looked at the work that I've done? Have they actually taken the time to know me as a student? Or are they just like, okay, let's look for a student who's involved. Oh, she's also Black. Let's put that in there, you know?
yeah, definitely.
Yeah.
And kind of like building off of that, would you say that you've ever experienced any beyond tokenism, any other microaggressions when you were in those student leadership positions, and kind of how did you go about those experiences?
Uh, yeah, definitely. So I would say a lot of the experiences that I would have had were have mostly been from the other students that I've worked with. So for me personally, I'm from the city, and I would experience all those little kinds of microaggressions that they themselves wouldn't even realize are like bad per se, because microaggressions don't always have to be negative. So oftentimes I would get, you speak so well for where you're from. And I'm like, what do you mean by that? And it's like, oh, you're from the city. And I'm like, okay, okay. And, so, stuff like that. Or even the type of music that I listen to, I've heard from other people, they're like, oh, you listen to white people music, or you've been spending too much time upstate. And it's almost kind of like they themselves don't really know any better. But even saying that is like frustrating, I feel like, not for me, but for other students, because it's not our job to educate you on how you're supposed to interact with different kinds of people. So it's unfortunate though, because I feel like going back to what you said about the whole power dynamic, I've addressed it with my fellow students and fellow coworkers, but I was never personally comfortable like addressing it with my like higher ups. Yeah.
Okay, yeah, that kind of makes sense. Would
Mhm.
you say though that the inclusive dialogue facilitator position helped you address it in indirect ways? Did you find that even though when you express that, which is really, really unfortunate, right? Even though you express that with your peers and your fellow coworkers, you felt like, okay, that's a space where I can share these things, but they weren't necessarily met with, the appropriate repercussions. Do you feel like the inclusive dialogues was a good outlet for you to kind of feel like you still are having an impact on microaggressions on campus?
Yeah, um I definitely would say so, because a lot of the students who signed up for the job, it's kind of in the job description, it tells you what you will be doing in this role. And what I actually found really helpful about the job is that on the first day that I got there in the orientation, it was students of all kinds of races. And what made me really happy is that, being that it's a PWI, the white students that signed up for the job were very willing and eager to be called out on their privilege, to be called out on their personal mistakes, to be called out and to learn from their own personal behavior. And for me as a woman of color, being that we're all in that same environment, I felt it was a good outlet, because I can now take this and educate you as a coworker who will be spreading the same message, but at the same time get my point across and share my experience without feeling like I have to filter myself down in that type of environment. Because I remember we even had in the dialogues, you're always hosting it with someone who is your opposite. So I hosted one on race and disability, and my counter person was white, and they had an invisible disability, which kind of counteracted mine. So it's kind of important to have those spaces, because you can kind of give both perspectives, and both people don't have to feel kind of awkward in terms of admitting their own mistakes or calling out things that they've experienced if you're one of those people who's been affected by it.
Yeah, I think that you really spoke about well how the inclusive dialogue and the peers that you had, that what is a model that other workspaces should be following essentially, right? Because
Yeah.
you felt like you were comfortable talking about things there. It did have that representation of inclusion. So I think that is really great, and an insight that students who are looking for other jobs may really know the importance of asking interview questions about, what is the actual commitment to inclusion, and seeing if those coworkers are comfortable talking about it in that space, because that would be kind of an indication, right? Is this
Yeah.
actually a place that I want to be working?
Yeah, exactly.
So kind of building off of your experiences now that you've talked about them a little bit more, do you have any advice for students on how they can really thrive in predominantly white workspaces and things along those lines?
Yeah, so I definitely would say, so speaking to both students of color and non-students of color even. So for students of color, I would definitely say stand your ground. And what I mean by that is, I know for myself, when I was a freshman in college, when I started, I felt very pressured to conform to like societal standards in terms of being at a PWI. I felt like I had to change the way that I spoke. I felt like I couldn't use any slang like in my voice, even when I'm talking to my friends, in fear of coming off a certain way. I felt like I couldn't even get upset about certain topics or call people out on their behavior in fear of being the angry Black woman. So I definitely would say to students of color, stand your ground, and also keep in the back of your mind that it is not your responsibility to educate your fellow students on their own bad behavior or their own biases. Because at the end of the day, you are not a spokesperson for your entire race. You know what I'm saying? So, or whatever your ethnicity is. So for the students of color, I definitely would say stand your ground, and also make it a point to kind of show your peers and your school that I'm here. You know what I'm saying? That my voice matters. And to the non-students of color, I definitely would say educate yourself, and and I mean this in the nicest way possible, but kind of check your own biases, because as much as everybody doesn't like to admit, everybody has their own form of implicit bias about whatever kind of topic it is. And I feel like it's unfortunate that in a lot of these kinds of spaces that I personally experienced, my non-students of color friends are they get defensive, or they feel some type of way when they're called out on their own behavior, because they think we're attacking them as a person. And it's not, us coming at you as saying you're a bad person, calling you a racist. It probably isn't even any of those things, but it's a matter of, these are things that you are taught, and things that you are taught can be untaught, if that makes sense. And I feel like a lot of people don't realize that, is that it's not your fault the things you were taught, but as an adult it is, because you make the choice with the things that you've been given. So for those students, I definitely would say just check yourself and educate yourself.
I think what's really cool about the advice that you provided there is the main theme was just being authentic and really being open to having those very real conversations, right? From feeling comfortable in being yourself, that you shouldn't have to alter your behavior to, the students of color you were talking to the other side of it, right? Of if a student of color says something to a white student, it shouldn't ease up the defenses a little bit, right? Like, this is a learning moment kind of thing. So I think that's really great for, insightful and very tangible things that our students could be doing.
Yeah, of course. Exactly. Sorry.
You're good. Kind of moving up a little bit though, what would your advice for administrators, whether it be in higher ed or just other companies, what would your advice be on how they can really have an inclusive environment?
Yeah, so I definitely feel, in terms of the administration, something that I've experienced at all of the institutions that I've attended for the most part, is that anytime it's something centered around minorities or holidays for minorities, that kind of thing, the school will kind of leave all of that up to the students, if that makes sense. So during Black History Month, for example, I noticed a lot of events going on at Binghamton were kind of being put on by the minority student groups and stuff like that, which to an extent I do understand. But at the same time, I feel like the only time that I've personally seen like the administration address anything when it came to the students of color is if something bad happened on campus, like a racial issue or something like that happened. That's only kind of where we see the administration's face, or them, stating that they stand in support for what's happening now, which is great. But I feel like I personally would like to see more kind of highlighting of our students of color in their good accomplishments. You know what I'm saying? Not just kind of big, like, oh, look at the students of color that got the Chancellor's Award, or this student of color got the President's Award, something like that, because that's kind of, almost given things that I personally feel like they have to highlight. Like, even if it's small things, like, oh, look, this student broke a record on campus or something, like small like that. Like, I feel like there's a sense of disconnect between the students of color and the administration, because I feel like a lot of the issues are kind of more put on the students because the administration, personally, in my opinion, doesn't have the representation for the students. So there is the disconnect there, like, already, so I feel like on their part, what they can do is be more involved with their students of color, listen to their concerns. And it goes back to what I said previously about, like what you said, is lower your defenses a little bit. If your students of color want to come to you for whatever the issue is, don't take it as a personal attack, kind of take it as, how can we improve on this to better our students' environment on our campus?
Yeah, I like that. I think your main kind of theme there is be proactive rather than reactive, right? Is kind of always these kinds of issues around equity, inclusion, students of color should always be at the forefront of what administrators are doing. And I think that's great. So the last question I have, and this seems to be the theme, the last question is always like the heaviest or the most complex. But so I'm sure Sha-Niyah, that representation and having an inclusive image on campus, whether it be on websites, in different marketing materials, is important. How do you think that administrators or staff on campus can approach students in a way that doesn't cause them to feel tokenized, but still, has them active in these photo opportunities?
Yeah, I definitely would say, coming from a student that has been given several of those photo opportunities, I definitely would say kind of show the student that you actually know who they are. You know what I'm saying? Like, I personally, I know for myself, like, I kind of have just gotten like emails saying, hey, Sha-Niyah, like, would you like to be involved in this project? We know you're involved on the campus. Would you like to do this? And that's it. Like, it's very vague. And that's kind of hinting towards, who I am. But I feel like maybe kind of show the student like, hey, oh, we've seen your work in this, or we really like that you did this. We want you to participate in this. Like, kind of show the student that you've taken the opportunity to get to know who they are. It's almost like if you go in for a job interview, kind of, in a lot of places, they ask you, what do you know about us? Like, they want to see that you know them, and that you've taken the time to get to the effort to kind of know who they are. And I feel like the students kind of want to see, that you've taken the chance to know who they are, their accomplishments, what they've done on campus, or even like for those students who have really big presence on campus, like, oh, we really value you here or here. We want you to participate in this to kind of further, how do I say it? So kind of, we want you here to help benefit both yourself and the school in a positive way, not so much as, oh, just, we want your face here. Yeah,
I like that. Yeah, it gets that. And it also extends out to interviews too, right? It's just as important for the student to feel valued, for the potential applicant to feel that they're trying to be sold to the company too, right? It's not just this one-way street. So really being intentional and caring about who the student is outside of just one part of their identity.
Exactly.
Nice. Well, thank you so much for being interviewed, Sha-Niyah. I know you had some really great insights for our students, and to everybody watching, I will see you on the next one.